Welcome to the webinar, Clean Energy for All Europeans package. Does the European Commission modeling assign the right role to energy efficiency and to renewables? Hosted by Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. My name is Aris, and I'm a program officer at the Copenhagen Center and supporting the activities related to energy efficiency webinars. A couple of things before we move to the main content of our webinar. This webinar is going to be about 75 minutes long, including time for the questions and answer session at the end. In case you cannot stay until the end or want to get back to our interesting presentations, all the materials and recordings of the whole webinar will be available online in a few days on Copenhagen Center's knowledge management system. And we have many other webinars and information there. Have a look. I'll give you a link later during this introduction. A few things about the Copenhagen Center. The Center conducts research and advisory activities in the field of energy efficiency and serves as energy efficiency hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The Center has an established network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy efficiency activities. On a regular basis, the Copenhagen Center is conducting webinars. All materials, including recordings and presentations from previous webinars, can be found on Copenhagen Center's knowledge management system under the e-learning session. The material of today's webinar will be uploaded in that section shortly. I would like to briefly introduce the speaker of today's webinar. Quentin is a policy advisor in E3G's Brussels office, leading work on EU energy and climate governance and on energy efficiency. Yamina is a senior energy policy analyst at OpenExp. Prior to this position, Yamina was policy and scientific officer at the Renewables and Energy Efficiency Unit at the Institute of Energy and Transport of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Andreas is an associate with Agora Energiewende, an independent think tank headquartered in Berlin that develops scientifically based and politically feasible approaches for ensuring the success of the energy transition. Tom is an official of the Energy Department of the European Commission. He worked on renewable energy policy and energy market integration issues for some years, and now acting as head of unit of the Economic Analysis and Financial Instrument Unit. Claude is a member of the European Parliament. He held the position of Vice President of the Green Group of the European Parliament from 2002 to 2014. He is a member of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, and the coordinator on energy issues of the Green Group. And finally, Dries works as head of the Energy Union program at the European Climate Foundation in Brussels. Dries carried forward the ECF's flagship roadmap 2050 project and now heads the ECF's activities on EU energy policy and the Energy Union. Finally, I would like to inform that you can send us your question during the presentations, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. And with that, I would like to give the control to Quentin.
Thank you very much, Harry. So first of all, welcome to all of you here in this webinar this morning. We're really pleased to see that there are more than 150 people registered for this webinar. So it shows that there is a huge interest in the topic and probably because there are many unknowns about it. Today's webinar is going to be mostly in three parts. The first one is you will hear a presentation from Yamina and Andreas, who both have looked very into the nitty-gritty details of the modeling used by the Commission. Secondly, there will be a panel discussion with some of the key stakeholders, someone from the European Commission, Tom House, acting head of unit at DG Ener, Claude Turmes, rapporteur for the governance regulation in the European Parliament, and Dries, the program director at the European Climate Foundation. And finally, we will take questions from the audience. So if you write a question in the box on the side, I will take then your question and I will submit them to the panelists. So it is really important that we also gather your inputs in order to make this as lively and as helpful as possible for all of us. We're here today to take a closer look at the modeling used by the European Commission to underpin the clean energy package that is keeping Brussels busy at the moment. And back in times in November 2016, when the European Commission released several pieces of legislation that was aiming at delivering the energy union, we didn't quite realize the impact assessment to it. And then the more we looked into it as a community, the more we realized that it is actually very helpful for us to take a deep, hard look into it, because now we're a few weeks away of the Parliament and the Council adopting their position in a couple of weeks, and we've seen a strong link between the impact assessment and the modeling used and the numbers of the headline targets that are put forward. A couple of words, just as background really, about why are we even talking about impact assessments and what is it all about? So each Commission proposal is accompanied by an impact assessment. It involves certainly a qualitative analysis of the expected impacts, and often so a quantitative analysis using a certain modeling. The modeling does not preempt predictions of future developments. There is no direct connections, but it does empower, and I think it's the key word here. It's about empowering decision makers to anticipate potential impact of certain choices that they will make and the trade-off that may exist between targets or between policies. The European Commission is using an extensive energy system modeling, the result of which play a substantial role in determining the outcome of the Commission's impact assessment. Since 2003, it's mostly the price model used by the Commission to underpin this whole impact assessment. And it's the Technical University of Athens that owns that model. It's a privately owned model. The results of that model are really central and critical to everything related to climate and energy in Europe, because this is the model that underpinned the 2050 roadmap exercise back in 2011, but also the 2030s target setting process. At the same time, the Commission is developing its own in-house model, Potentia, but it is still unclear when and if this model is going to be used in the coming weeks or months in the upcoming modeling. On this slide, you can see that the Commission has been using 7 models, different models for the Clean Energy for All package. And what is really striking is probably the last column, because the last column showed us that most of them, 6 out of 7, are actually not accessible to privately researcher or to really criticisms ahead of the publication. So it's a closely owned model and exercise most of all. The outcome of all this process, of all this modeling, was these numbers that has been captured into this slide. The Commission analyzed in 2012 and 2013 showed that higher renewables and higher efficiency scenarios would lead to higher investment costs, but lower energy purchases. System cost for 30% RES very similar to the one to the 27% RES, assuming ambitious efficiency policies. A scenario with 45% greenhouse gas reduction and 35% RES was found to be only slightly more expensive. In October 2014, when the heads of state decided on a number of the targets, they've agreed on 40% reduction greenhouse gas emissions, at least 27% energy efficiency, an indicative target, and at least 27% RES. Finally, in the clean energy package, the Commission put on the table an at least 27% binding RES target, at least 30% indicative efficiency target, as well as no binding member state target, aside from the 2020 baseline. Now we third couple of months down the line, and what we see is that there is very little appetite in the Council among member states for a greater ambition. Now the single member states have raised the prospect of national binding targets for RES or efficiency, and member states are really doing a good job in pushing very hard for flexibility all over the place. The situation is fairly different in the Parliament, where the rapporteurs for both the Renewable Energy Directive and the governance regulation have called for an increase in ambition and a strengthening of the fines. On the efficiency side, the rapporteur of the Efficiency Directive it's a different story, let's say. But at the same time, the Environment Committee of the same Parliament has called for a 40% binding efficiency target and national binding target. So it's a bit all over the place at this stage. But the question is, what does the modeling tell us, and how does that relate to where we are? What is hiding behind those numbers? What I propose now is I'm going to give the floor first to Yamina and then to Andreas. I would like the two presentations to follow immediately each other, and then I will take the floor back to turn towards our panelists. So Yamina, I give you the floor. Can you please stick to 15 minutes?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here today to share with you our assessment of the modeling results related to the energy efficiency directive that was included in the clean energy package published on November 2016 by the European Commission. As mentioned by Quentin, the assessment of energy efficiency impact and the impact of the energy performance of building directive was done using a set of seven models. But what I will present today will be based mainly on PRIME's modeling results, which is because PRIME's is the leading model used by the Commission for our energy and climate targets. For those of you who are not familiar with the Commission scenarios, what you need to know is that the Commission checks the impact of at least 5 scenarios for what regards energy efficiency. The first one is the scenario EUCO 27, which corresponds to 27% energy savings target agreed by the Council in 2014. And then the second one is EUCO 30, which corresponds to 30% energy savings target, which was also in a request from the Council to the Commission to check the impact of 30% energy savings target. The Commission checks 2 additional scenarios, one with 33% energy savings target and the other one with 35% energy savings target. These 2 scenarios do not have any political basis to my knowledge. And then the last scenario, and which we should be looking to, is the scenario with 40% energy savings target. This scenario, this target is the one the Parliament has been calling for since 2014, and the one that several stakeholders in Brussels and at member states level are calling for. So the 3 major scenarios we should be looking today are the one 27%, 30%, and 40% energy savings target. What we have here, the first result that we have from PRIMES is the primary energy mix. And what we have here is the primary energy mix. What is above 0 is what we have been educated to see in the primary energy mix. We have renewables in green, we have solid fuels in black, oil in red, gas in blue, and then nuclear energy in yellow. What we are not used to see in our primary energy mix is the energy savings. And actually, energy savings as part of the energy mix is completely new as a concept. It has been introduced by the European Commission Energy Union Strategy Framework in 2015. And this which calls us to consider energy efficiency as an energy source on its own right, and promise that the Commission will make sure that in the package, energy savings will compete on equal basis with other energy sources. So, and this is why we added energy savings to the primary energy mix, to the visualization of the primary energy mix. But because energy savings are basically energy that is not used, we consider this in below 0, negative. And what we have here, the dark green, is the energy savings with 27% energy savings targets, what we would achieve, and with the light green are the additional savings that we may have if we go for more ambitious energy efficiency targets. And what we see is that in all scenarios, energy savings are higher in absolute term than any other fuel, than oil, which is the first fuel currently for Europe. What does that mean? It means that PRIMES, or the Commission scenarios, project energy savings to be the first fuel of Europe in 2030. But this is not enough. What the Energy Union for Strategy Framework calls for is to really look at the contribution of energy savings to all overall energy, the energy system of Europe. And this is where the scenario with 40% energy savings target becomes interesting. So what we have here is the sum of renewables and energy savings in case of 40% energy savings targets. And we see that this sum is higher than the sum of all other fuels and nuclear, all other solid fuels and nuclear. This is very important in terms of energy security perspective, because this is this could be the starting phase for us to reduce our energy dependency, which is today more than 50%. When this said, we need to look at what the level of ambition. We need to assess the level of ambition in different scenarios. And what we have from the Commission is for the period 2010-2020, these are the savings calculated using primes, exactly the same methodology and assumptions like for the 2030. And what we have here, what is in blue, are the savings that we could have for the period 2020-2030. So we compare 10 years with 10 years using exactly the same methodology and the same model. And what we see is that the savings in 27% target, efficiency target, are much lower than those of 2020, of the current period actually. And it's the same for the savings in case of 30% energy savings target. It starts getting a bit serious when we go for 33, and it's really different when we go for 40% energy savings target. What does that mean? It means that if we go for 30% proposed target by the Commission, 30% energy savings target, this means that 2020-2030 will be most probably lost decade for efficiency in Europe. And if it's lost decade for efficiency, it's also lost decade for decarbonization and for many other priorities in Europe. That's why we have to be very careful about what 30% energy savings means for Europe in terms of ambition and in terms of leading the decarbonization, the global decarbonization objectives. And this is why 40% energy savings target should be the starting point for Europe, should be the baseline actually for Europe. And this is confirmed by, if we look at the impact of energy savings on climate, on greenhouse gas emission reduction. So the Commission scenarios were designed before the Paris Climate Agreement. They are aligned with what we submitted for the Paris Climate Agreement. So we are here with the Commission scenarios. So basically the EUCO scenarios are, you see here we have the green one is the 40%. So even the 40%, the difference is not that important between different scenarios. 40% reduces a bit more in our greenhouse gas emissions, but not that much compared to the IEA 2 degrees scenario. It's true that the IEA 2 degrees scenario, the IEA modeling is different from price modeling, and it cannot be just compared like that. However, just to have an indication, it's important to see where do we stand with our scenarios compared to the IEA scenario. But more important than the IEA 2DS scenario is the Paris Climate Agreement, because we went to the negotiation with this, but the Paris Climate Agreement puts us here, somewhere here. And this is why we cannot just stay with our scenarios and talk about the Paris Climate Agreement. And the 40%, the green line that we see here, is the closest one to the Paris Climate Agreement. It could maybe 40% is enough in terms of energy savings targets, if it is combined with a higher ambition for renewables, because this one is 40% energy savings target and 27% for renewables. So if combined with higher ambition for renewables, maybe we will probably get closer to what we should be doing to meet our obligations under the Paris Agreement. So this is why we say that 40% energy savings target combined with the ambitious renewable target should be the baseline scenario for 2020. At this stage, you may probably question where are we going to have these savings, in which sector? So the decarbonization scenarios of the Commission are mainly based, as you see here, on reducing final energy demand in residential sector, the blue bars that you see here, and the green bars, the non-residential sector. The industry is the black one. So there is not too much happening, or there is not too much expected to happen in case we go from 27% energy savings target to 30% for industry, and the same occurs for transport. And even when we go to 40% energy savings target, which is the target that we should be looking for, we have only 5% reduction. We expect only 5% reduction in transport compared to 27% target, and only 12% for industry. So we see that it's very low. So basically, the decarbonization scenarios are led by reducing energy demand in the building sector. However, there is one issue that we know today, is that the modeling results, these scenarios are based on one assumption, is that we will increase over time our renovation rate and the deepness of the renovation. However, we have from Prime's modeling results, we have the renovation rates, and these renovation rates is much higher than the ones considered as an input for modeling EPPD using beams square. So basically, there are inconsistencies between the modeling results coming from Price for renovation rate and the modeling results used as the modeling inputs used for beams modeling. It's very important to be consistent to make sure that EED results match with EPPD results, and hopefully in the future, if we have more modeling of other sectors like transport and industry. And then one argument against the energy higher efficiency ambition is the cost and the investment, energy system cost and investment expenditures. Remember in the previous slide, we have seen that transport sector is the sector where we do not expect high changes in final energy consumption. In other words, the contribution of transport to the energy transition is very low. However, when you look at it in terms of investment expenditures, and investment expenditures are the investment, this does not include financial costs and any other cost. So when you look at it in terms of investment expenditures, what you see here is that the transport sector has the highest investment expenditures, much higher than the residential sector, which is the higher contributor to the energy transition. So basically, the energy efficiency target, based on these figures, is hindered. The efficiency ambition is hindered by transport sector, which is the lowest contributor to the energy transition. And similarly, if we look at the energy system cost, this time this includes the financial cost and all other costs. So what we see here, the efficiency investment is only the red part. The red part, you see that is given only, that is provided only for residential and tertiary building and tertiary sector. It's not provided for industry and for transport. And what we see here is that, and the other thing, so we don't know, the efficiency investment provided for buildings is only about insulation. So for example, if you replace your boiler, the investment that you made for replacing your boiler is the cost of this investment is included in the green part, which is the capital cost. And the same occurs for industry because the scenarios are based on replacement of motors only, and it is included in capital cost. And the same occurs for transport. If you replace your car with a more efficient one, so it is included as well in the capital cost. And more important, so the efficiency investment costs here are based on 10% discount rate. So they do not take into account the societal effects that are actually, it's interesting because they are estimated in the impact assessment. Today we have an estimation of the health impact of the energy transition, and we have an estimation of the affordability for low income in the impact assessment. What does it mean? It means that we increase the cost of efficiency investment by considering private discount rate of 10%. And the other interesting point is that this time in the package, the Commission included the Smart Finance for Smart Building initiative, which proposes to provide an EU guarantee. When you have the guarantee, this means that you lower the discount rate, and this is not taken into account in the modeling. So it is important in the next modeling round to make sure that first we have the breakdown of the efficiency of different costs in all sectors and not only for insulation. Second, to make sure that the investment, to explain how the investment expenditures could be higher for the sector that is the lowest contributor. And third, to consider a societal discount rate and to consider the effect of the smart finance for smart buildings. The other impact the other argument we hear against higher efficiency ambition is the negative impact that a higher efficiency ambition could have on the EU ETS. And actually, what we see here is the ETS carbon price. It decreases by increasing the efficiency ambition. However, none of them, actually in all scenarios, the ETS carbon price is much higher than the current carbon price. And but this doesn't impact negatively the greenhouse gas emission reduction. So the ETS carbon price decreases while greenhouse gas emission reduction is increasing, and it is increasing because thanks to the efficiency and the renewables target, the stringency of the efficiency and the renewables target. And this result is aligned with what we experienced in the previous period, actually. The last argument that we hear against higher efficiency ambition is the argument of the competitiveness of the EU industry. But based on Prime's modeling, what we see here is that in total energy-related cost in the scenario with 40% energy savings target is lower than the one for 27% energy savings target. So the competitiveness argument is as well is not backed up with any evidence, actually. So what we see from the impact assessment is that there is nothing against the 40% energy savings target. This is why we say that we should consider as baseline 40% energy savings target combined with higher renewable energy target. And it's very important for our energy security, but also to make sure that Europe is aligned with what we signed for at the Paris Climate Agreement. The other important lesson learned from this impact assessment is the need to make sure that we have there is coherence between the EED modeling and the sectoral modeling, which wasn't the case in the case of building, as shown by the renovation rates. And then when it comes to cost and investment, we need to make sure that the investments and the costs that are for the least contributing sectors could not be the sectors that hinders the energy transition, as showed by the transport sector in the current impact assessment. We also, for the next modeling round, it is important to have the underlying data behind the cost and investment, and to have the breakdown of the efficiency investment for all sectors to understand to really distinguish efficiency investment from other investments that are happening. Last but not least, to make sure that we'll have smooth energy transition, we need to consider the societal approach to discount rate. 10% discount rate will increase the cost of energy efficiency solutions and will make some solutions not cost effective, actually. And it is also important to take into account to have all the Commission proposals, like the guarantee that is under Smart Finance for Smart Building, reflected in the modeling exercise. That's it from my side. The report with all the details is available on our website, OpenExp.eu, for free download. Thank you. Over to you.
To understand what was being said there. So I think there are mostly three messages. The first one is that the internal consistency of the modeling is not perfect between the EED and the EPPD. So there is a problem of internal consistency among impact assessments. And the second one is we need to use a societal approach to better reflect the impact of a lower discount rate and of a lower cost in general for building renovation in the impact assessment moving forward. So we've all heard that Claude Turmes is online, which is a good thing. You will be able to speak in 20 minutes. In the meantime, if you could mute yourself, that'd be much appreciated. So Andreas, you have the floor for 15 minutes.
Hello, this is Andreas GRAF from Agora and Energiewende. We're a think tank based in Berlin, as was said earlier, focusing on energy transition, and I will dive right into it. So a little bit of background to begin with. One of the megatrends we're observing currently in energy markets is a massive decline in costs for wind, solar, and battery prices. So the costs of the leading mature renewable energy technologies, both onshore and offshore wind and solar PV, and here you can see a graph showing the massive decline that we've seen in very real terms since 2008. And this also is true for batteries, as I've stated, making it increasingly cost effective to also integrate those renewables, which are variable. what we also saw, following up on the impact assessment of the European Commission, is a divergence between the real auction results that we're seeing on electricity markets and the assumptions that were going into the model. So here you see a graph of the cost assumptions based on levelized costs of electricity for onshore wind, offshore wind, and for solar PV in Northern Europe. And here very real auction results reflecting costs that are below assumptions in the model even out to 2050. What this shows us is that auctions have been extremely effective in bringing down or in highlighting these cost reductions, but that models have been less reactive in including these in their models. It's difficult enough seeing also that even between the time that we published the report and the webinar today, we've seen additional auctions that again further emphasize this and are really driving the debate on the declining cost of renewables. So against this background, Agora and Energiewende assessed the Commission impact assessment for the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, especially on the renewable side, and identified some key shortcomings that I will get into immediately. So just as a little bit of background for my first point, the cost of capital is a major determinant of the cost of renewable energy, not only in Europe, but across the world. And what you see here on the right is a depiction of the cost structure of investments in conventional technologies and in renewables. And what you'll see on the left is that for the conventional technologies, gas, hard coal, and lignite, for example, you have a very high share of variable costs, which include CO2 prices, but especially fuel. On the right, you see the renewable energy technologies, wind, onshore, offshore, and photovoltaics that we've been discussing. Very high share of fixed upfront investment costs. On the left, you see a map of the picture for wind onshore investment costs, capital costs, in 2014. These costs have further declined since 2014, so that we even have a different picture today than we did in 2014. But here it is mainly to highlight that you have far lower costs in mature markets for renewables, especially in Western Europe, than you do in parts of Europe that have been less active in developing renewables. And so this is an important thing to keep in mind when also modeling the potential implications of a cost-effective development of renewables. So to identify one of our key shortcomings in the model, you see here on the left, so the weighted average cost of capital assumptions and what impact they have on the cost curves for onshore wind, specifically as a technology. So on the top graph, top line, you see Prime's assumption of 7.5%. And what the model did was essentially take a flat rate approach and simply assume 7.5% cost of capital across all of Europe. If you remember the picture we saw just on the previous slide, there's a much different picture for WACC across Europe. So first takeaway, this is a key simplification that does not reflect the cost-effective development as we would see it in the real world. The second key point is that the mature markets that are actually seeing the massive share of onshore wind investments today and can also be expected to see the majority of wind investments also much into the future are given a much higher cost of capital in the model than is seen in the real world and can be expected in 2030. So here in the lower lines, you see how big of an impact this has, even if you just take the cost assumptions that Primes has taken for its model. On the right, you see, on the other hand, the production, taking the capacity for offshore wind that was actually an outcome of the model. You see the differences in the production of electricity if you have different assumptions or the full load hours for electricity production. What the model did was assume for offshore wind as a technology, 3,000 to 3,350 full load hours, which essentially means the amount of hours in which the full theoretical capacity of a technology is used in the year. The real world results we're seeing today and can very much be expected to continue in the future are closer to 4,400. So what this means is that when you look on the graph on the left, comparing the assumptions for how productive a specific technology is in producing electricity, the purple bar on the left, and the real world productivity and efficiency of the technologies that we see today, there's a difference of 54% just with in the electricity produced just with by changing the assumptions in the model. So a key conclusion for us from this assessment has been that a 27% res share as was cannot be possibly a cost optimal contribution towards a 40% greenhouse gas target. And we've seen already in the initial impact assessment 2012 that it was only slightly more expensive to go far higher on ambition, and we can very much expect this to be even more so the case today. Secondly, and thirdly, in our assessment, we looked at some of the other assumptions for the model and the messages that came out of the impact assessment. And one of the key ones has been an underplaying of the importance of robust renewables frameworks. A quantitative model can only do so much in portraying the real world when it comes to policies. And this is seen very much in also the assumptions that are placed in the model to reflect real world conditions. So on the one hand, you see in shortcoming 2 here, an estimation essentially of where ETS prices will stand and what role they can play in cost effectively delivering renewables development. And if you compare for example, 42 euros per ton of CO2 in the EUCO 27 scenario, you see very much that these numbers are very far removed from what carbon market analysts are expecting to see in the future, especially when considering the ambition of ETS reform that is currently being discussed. And it's difficult to comment this without knowing the ultimate outcome of the ETS reform discussions. But from everything we know, and they are close to finishing, they are far from delivering a 42 euro per ton of CO2 in 2030. Shortcoming 3 here, on the other hand, highlights the fact that while the Commission, as an outcome of some of its modeling in the impact assessments, especially in the market design context, came to the conclusion that we're heading towards a future where cost declines also mean that renewables will be able to be developed and delivered fully driven by the market, essentially by price signals on wholesale markets and through CO2, that they will be delivered cost effectively by these market signals. The model itself assumes policies that are not made explicit. So what we have here is on the one hand a message highlighting that mature renewables will be able to be driven by the market without necessarily all of the preconditions for that market-driven renewables development being made explicit, at least in the way that one could interpret the quantitative model. It should be stated, however, that the Commission in its qualitative assessment is much more explicit in what these preconditions are. And I won't go through the 10 specified preconditions for having a market-based financing of renewables, but I think the long list speaks for itself. We are, without the enabling framework and the policy and governance structure, that we will not have a cost-effective and a market-driven development of renewables that we need to cost-effectively reach those targets as well. So this brings me to essentially my final point, which is that what we have seen here is a need to reflect these changing costs in the impact assessment, in the modeling we're doing out into the future, and just between the 2012-13 input assumptions that were used for modeling to initiate the conversation on a 2030 framework, and the ultimate proposal by the Commission, which took into account assumptions from 2015 or 2016, we've seen a massive decline in the costs that are the result, are assumed to be the result of the different scenarios. So if you take the comparable scenarios modeled in 2012, 2013, and 2016, there was for example, for a 30% renewable scenario, a cost decline in overall system costs of 9.1%, and an increase in the res share that would be cost effective in that context to reach a 40% target of more than 1%. It would be, policymakers would be ill-advised to see this as the end to the potential decline in costs and the limits of the cost-effective potential for renewables. And so we very much welcome efforts, and Dries Acke from ECF will discuss some of the work they've been doing, and Tom can potentially comment on what the Commission is doing to reflect some of these declining costs in future modeling efforts. But at the same time, it's important to note that we've been unaware of potential future cost declines in the past, and we will continue to be unaware of them in the future. And so the outcomes we see today will certainly not be the limits, or should not be the limits to our ambition. And I will just end with this picture also, that this is not a Europe-specific phenomenon of declining costs. We are seeing declining costs across the world, and it's also an opportunity for Europe to seize leadership to also capture future clean energy markets. In fact, this picture this graphic was created only several weeks ago, and yet in that time we've also again seen solar PV auctions in Saudi Arabia of less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour. We're seeing numbers where you really have to scratch your scratch your head to see how we're getting to 2050 numbers so quickly even today. So to conclude very quickly, the renewables numbers we are seeing in the real world today are significantly cheaper than modeled by the Commission, and therefore we conclude that the cost-effective share for renewables in the energy system to meet a 40% greenhouse gas target, and even more importantly, a Paris Agreement goal of close to 1.5 degrees, is not possible. Needs a far higher share of RES, and can be accomplished at the same cost or a lower cost. And secondly, we need robust renewable energy frameworks for those cost-effective potentials also to be delivered. Third, the limits to our current knowledge about future development should not be the limit to our ambition. And finally, the setting of higher ambition should also be informed by the desire of the European Commission, but of course of all European citizens, to see a vibrant renewable energy industry in Europe to drive economic and employment opportunities. And with that, I close. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Right on time, very good. And so just a quick reminder to everyone, you can ask any question you want on the box on the side, and we're going to take that question, I'm going to feed them, and then we're going to play them back to the 5 speakers that we will be hearing by then. So you want me, Andreas, to do so. And I want to move on now to the panel discussion, starting with Tom House. So Tom, you're the person in charge of the economic modeling with Yamina, and we've been very unfair so far, because you basically given the floor to 2 people that do not really are super happy about the way that the modeling has been done, or at least highlights the limits of the exercise. So I guess I have two questions for you. The first one is what do you answer to them? How much credit do you give them? And secondly is, we know that the Commission is undergoing a new massive modeling exercise looking to 2050, and modeling the energy system in 2050 is a huge enterprise. And what kind of barriers and safeguards do you put in place, or are you going to put in place to ensure that basically it's transparent and you don't get the kind of criticisms for 2050 that you got for the clean energy package? Tom, I'm handing over to you. If you go answer in 5 minutes, I know it's a short time, but I would really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for this chance to take part in this webinar. I'm sorry I can't be there visually as well as orally, but technology failed me. And thanks to both speakers for that introduction. I think it's been a very good exposition of the nature of primes and the modelling that the Commission has done and the different issues that the Commission has explored. But in terms of what you call the drawbacks and so on, perhaps I'd flag up first and foremost the thing that strikes me is that something that it's called a criticism of primes is actually a criticism of the Commission's starting point, not of the modelling, because our starting point was modelling it was the impact assessment for the legislative proposals which were implementing the European Council's proposals of targets for 2030. So we were modelling the 40% emissions reductions, the 27% renewables, and the 27 or 30% energy efficiency savings. Those were the requirements of the European Council, and that was the framework of all the analysis. So the starting point is for me, it's a misconception of the role of the whole impact assessment work and of primes, is that we were not trying to drive everything as far as we possibly could and see how far we could get. It was purely modeling the details of how the different pathways and the best pathways of getting to those agreed targets agreed at the European Council. So I think for me that's addressing a lot of the points that were raised, but I'll come to some of the others. Just broadly, yes, we do use primes, and yes, it's relatively expensive. But I have to say, in terms of modeling the detail of European energy sector, both at the European level and for member states, it is literally the best model in the world. We undertook a tender to try to see what models were out there. It won the tender. We've been working with it for some years, and each year it improves. Each year we try to capture a lot of the detail that Yamina and Andreas flagged up. In the early days, it was a very, very simple model, but we've improved the representation of investment costs, of sectoral breakdown. So each year it gets improved. And of course, each year we become more and more transparent and publish a lot of the details of the model. So that's primes. In addition, I'd flag up that, yes, we are working with the JRC department of the Commission to create the Potentia model. This was flagged up. It will be great when this is up and running to have an in-house model, which is also very transparent, and that work is ongoing. It wasn't possible to use it for this current exercise, but that's something we hope to have in the future. So yes, the starting point is primes and Potentia. But as I say, the framework was the European Council framework. And I think some of the results that come up, Yasmina, sometimes you describe them as surprising, but for us they were not. For instance, the fact that we do more energy savings in the period of 2010 to 2020 compared to 2020 and 2030. Now, in a sense, for us, this is absolutely intuitive. We undertake the cheaper measures first, and we can get further towards the target than we can when we encounter the more expensive measures that we need to take later. So for me, the relative performance early rather than later is quite intuitive and not surprising. We also had the discussion about Paris, and there I would also say that, again, the framework for the impact assessment was not achieving Paris. As Yasmina, as you pointed out, the analysis and the targets discussion all happened before Paris. So whilst in the longer term, we say that our analysis was to reach 2050 was a stylized approach to reach the Paris Agreement of 2%, achieving the 80% reduction to achieve to head towards the 2%. It is a very different story post Paris, and that's why everyone, including the IPCC and us, and ECF, are now reflecting on what needs to be done to go to Paris. But that's a different story. No one had set out with this legislative package to achieve Paris, because we don't even know what it actually means yet, or how to get to the 1.5 degrees Celsius. Perhaps a couple of points on Andreas's side. I think you highlight very well what the limitations of any quantitative analysis to the whole approach are. Necessarily, you have to draw the line at some point. We used everything that was available to us when we were making the proposals in the course of 2015 and 2016, everything that was available to us. And I think this discussion, and certainly the discussions in Council and Parliament, show the importance and the usefulness of having such a quantitative analysis behind all the proposals. They answer a vast number of questions, but they cannot anticipate everything that happened since. When it comes to costs, which is the key point of Andreas' presentation, it's true a lot has happened. I would say that a lot has happened in terms of bringing cost reductions because of the policies of the European Commission and the European Union. The use of auctions, for instance, has been pushed by the Commission for a number of years through its guidance on support schemes, and its auctions which have done a lot to bring down the cost assumptions. And yes, we are so we feel partly able to claim some responsibility for helping bring those costs down. Similarly, when it comes to looking at the weighted average cost of capital, you quote the Agora project, which is the European Commission project, to actually identify that. And on the basis of that study, we were able, in fact, to incorporate those different costs of capital in different member states in the analysis done for the 2016 work through the current renewables arrangements scenario. So whenever we can, we take the latest available data and incorporate it. With the cost data, we couldn't do that. It didn't exist at the time. But because of the discussion that was triggered, thanks to Agora and European Parliament and others, we are now in the process of updating the cost data, the technology cost trends in our modeling, and we'll come up with new results to show to Parliament in the course of October. So the bottom line for me is that I think you might criticize the political framework in which the Commission made all the proposals, but for us that was given to us by the European Council. And the modeling itself is the best in the world, using the latest available assumptions and cost data available to us at the time of analysis. And as that analysis, or as those cost factors or other parameters change, we're happy to work out what to do, as we did with the Agora project, to assess what the real situation is, and to incorporate that into the next round of modeling. So I think we're perfect.
I think this is a very good bottom line for that really describes what you said, highlighted before. There were a number of questions for you on the side, so I'm coming back to you in a minute. But I'm really keen now in getting Claude Turmes' point of view on all of this. I'm pretty sure his final line will not be the Commission is perfect, but I might be wild guessing here. So Claude, two questions for you. The first one is, the Parliament is a bit of an impact assessment taker. They don't really have the capacity to run their own impact assessment. They very much rely on the Commission for all the numbers crunching, basically. And what can we do to improve the governance of the impact assessments to make it more democratic in a way? And the second question is, the impact assessment is often used to justify political choices. And I know that you've run your own modeling, which is different and came up with different results for the 2030 target than the one from the Commission. So maybe it would be good if you can say a few words about this, so we can put some contrast between the Commission's number and the one that you came up with, also using an independent model. I would like you to stay within a reasonable time frame of 5 to 10
Why are you saying that? So I start. Thanks a lot. Thank you also, Tom, for joining us. So first on the issue of Parliament and impact assessment. You have to understand that the one thing we should not do is pushing Parliament to do its own impact assessments. Why? Because then the actual energy package will be finalized in 2023. Because what would happen is, as soon as Commission presents something, the Parliament would, and it would not be the progressive forces, it would be the reactionary forces in Parliament, would push the Parliament's impact assessment body to do a scenario, which then would mean the Parliament would delay by 1 or 1.5 years its positioning on each and every energy co-decision in future. And the second thing which you have to understand, the European Parliament administration is completely EPP, ECR, and maybe some socialists infected. This is not a neutral body. So don't push the Parliament to do thorough impact assessment. What we can do at a certain moment is forcing Commission in the exercise of impact assessment ahead of coming up with legislation to be more transparent, and not only so, and I would propose two things. One is to have renominated scenarists, for example, like Felix Mottes and others, to have an early look to the Prime's results. And the second thing is maybe at certain moments to have a political discussion where some MEPs can participate. But don't push Parliament to do its own impact assessment. It will be a disaster. Second, I think Tom was extremely explicit, and I think he is right. The whole modeling exercise of 2014 and of 2016 was a political modeling exercise in which the results were predefined by the fact that Commission was accepting the proposal from October 2014, which, by the way, the European treaties have no role for heads of states. All energy efficiency and renewable targets, when you look to the treaties, have to be defined in co-decision, not in unanimity by heads of states. So having said that, what then happened is the model of primes was tuned to come out to justify the unjustifiable. That explains the 10% discount rate. That probably also explains why the capacity factors were also tuned or manipulated in the way they were. So good, that is where we were. We can deplore this, but that's history. Now, what is the future? The future was maybe this morning. So today, or in these days, there will be decisions inside Commission on one thing, which is when will Commission come out with the 2030 scenario and what will be in. And for example, on efficiency, all the scenarios which have again been done with a 10% discount rate and not with a 4% discount rate, which I find unacceptable, especially also because Commission is so proud of its financing, smart financing for smart buildings. So all smart financing for smart buildings is a useless exercise, and then we can stay with this 10% discount rate. Or if it is useful, then the barriers for efficiency are lower, and then the modeling should also be done on a 4% discount rate and not on a 10% discount rate. So I think Commission has to be logic, and it is not. And on the renewables, I think on the financing, costs probably the model is now, or hopefully the model is better, but I have still a lot of doubts on where it is on the capacity factor. And the capacity factor is the biggest driver for renewables. That shows the slides from Agora, and it will be even more in the future. And then I come to our modeling done by Felix Mottes. In our modeling, we have much more offshore wind than ever. And why? Because offshore wind is cheap, but also because of the running hours, the capacity factor. So, and I have one precise question to Turmes. When you redid your modeling 2030, did you go higher with your offshore wind, and which capacity factor did you integrate? Because I think that is probably the most relevant factor to show that we can go to not only to a 30-30 scenario, which maybe politically, again, EPP is pushing Cañete to have Commission to come out with 30-30 and not with 33 or 33 or 35-35. But I tell you, we need a 33-33 or 35-35 if afterwards in the negotiations we are to push the governments higher. And the second battle is about good. And then one information also from Mattes is all this is not Paris compatible, but that may not be a problem if it would not be worse. The reality is that if we stay even with the 30-30 scenario, Paris is gone, because in a carbon budget approach, and that is about Paris, is total volume accumulated between now and 2050. If we stay with this delayed action approach, then forget about Paris. And the drama of Commission is that Commission now doesn't want to go higher in the actual co-decision, with then pushing whole Europe for a decade of not being on Paris track, and then probably we will then have decided that Paris is gone. Good, and then last remark, the 2050 modeling, we will have again the same battle. It's DG Klima leading, the same people who manipulated everything until now will again be in the driving seat with a 10% discount rate for energy efficiency. And for that modeling, it will be worse. Why? Because we have a new phenomenon, which is the age of cheap oil and gas. So be aware that today modeling for efficiency comes out positive, also because Tom and Paul Hodgson were able to arc very high oil prices of 100 and more. They will not be able to arc this anymore. So how do you get cost-efficient efficiency in future in a low oil and gas age, especially if you keep the 10% discount rate high? Then I think efficiency will, in all modeling, be shown extremely expensive. And then we are, between us, we are fucked off. Huh? I don't know how we will solve this. So that's my input.
Thank you, Claude. Yes, indeed, the bottom line is slightly different from the one of Tom, as expected, I guess. Quickly turning now to Dries. So I think Claude was very clear about the fact that we should not ask the Parliament to do its own modelling, but does it mean that there is no place for civil society to play a role in double-checking and ensuring transparency around the modelling? So that would be my first question. My second question is you doing your own modelling, rerunning some of the rest costs. So what does it look like, and is it different from what the Commission is putting on the table?
Yes, thanks, Quentin. Good morning, everybody. This is Dries from the European Climate Foundation. So first of all, maybe indeed to reflect back to Tom, that's Tom's interpretation of the role of the Commission to take the Council mandate and to remain within the limits of that is a relatively odd interpretation of, I think, the Commission's right to initiative and the wider constitutional, let's say, constellation of the European institutions. So certainly that is something that you're not bound to, and I'm sure you would agree with that. Maybe to your question first, Quentin. So indeed, the state of play of the primes-based modeling of the Commission is a long-standing concern for civil society. Transparency is so important as a pillar for good governance and quality decision-making, and we believe that the Commission should be held to high standards on that. This is not a trivial question. I think some have said before that we've seen time and time again how the Commission scenarios have had a real impact on the debates in the European Parliament and the Council, and somehow operates as a magnet to the sensible solution, the balanced targets, and what have you. So yeah, if the Commission is assuming certain numbers, these are honest mistakes maybe, but with a consequence. Yeah, we do appreciate that the Commission has taken steps to improve the current tools. but progress is slow and especially incremental. Yeah? We know of the updates on primes on the renewables costs, on grid outcomes, also on efficiency, but this doesn't structurally solve the problem of what you could call black box analytics. Yeah. So the system or the system we're in right now, the NGO pressure for incremental improvements to the Commission modeling, I don't think that's the model going forward, or that shouldn't be the way we cooperate on these important topics. Hence, we're hopeful in a way that Potentia, as was mentioned before, is a new start that may combine the best of two worlds in terms of transparency and quality analytics. But we have little insight in that. And all we hear is how difficult it is and how much it's being delayed to replace the quality of primes and to get the buy-in from member states. Because of course the latter is very important. It also seems to be a priority for the Commission that member states accept the Potentia model. It's so important for the Commission that I think there was a meeting last week with the member states, which was in fact a closed-door meeting for the NGOs. So in a way, we hope that that is not a sign of somehow excluding once again a civil society watchdog, and actually also the Commission helpful input in making sure the latest data are taken into account. So a question to you, Tom, maybe very concretely is, when would be the wider stakeholder meeting on Potentia? Is there a date for that? Claude has mentioned it as well. We hope that the 2050 process, if that materializes, this Commission can serve as the opportunity to switch gears and to make more than an incremental change in the approach of modeling and conversation with the civil society, and really move to what I would call evidence-based policy making instead of the more policy-based evidence making that I believe Tom will refer to right now. Quentin asked me a second question, yes, which related to the ECF initiative with you as well, EPG, Agora, and some others involved in that. Indeed, we are running our own independent modeling. So our own, this is not our model, but we work with Aristeidis, who also works with the Commission. They're quite a good consultancy in Paris with an excellent optimization model on the power sector, very detailed, very granular, and very capable of reflecting the new realities that we see in the energy sector in Europe, but also globally. I don't need to repeat the cost reductions that we've seen over the last years that also projected in the future are really a game changer for the outlook of what we can actually achieve in the power sector. So that's an exercise that we did. We are preparing for a report that we launch on the 21st of November. Claude, I believe you have kindly accepted invitation to speak on the panel. I can also tell you, Tom, that Mechtild Worsdorfer from the DG Energy has also accepted, and also Vice President Sefcovic is available for the opening speech. So that is coming together quite well, 21st of November in the morning. So the modeling that we've done is indeed to actually look at what this new reality means for the power sector. And we see, of course, higher renewables uptake, but not necessarily in a transformational way if it's not accompanied by additional measures. And with additional measures is that the European energy system is really suffering from overcapacity. Yeah. So you may have a very cheap product. If there's no market for it, nobody buys it. So the clean energy package is doing some good stuff on system flexibility, regional operation and integration, demand response to some extent. But if this is not accompanied with a real step change on phase out of what you can call inflexible baseload generation, nuclear, coal, as well as a step change on residential demand response for EVs, for heat pumps, the electrification story, you will not really get the breakthrough that we're looking for. So we have done this breakthrough scenario, assuming those things are in a better shape. And we actually see that renewables uptake in the electricity sector up to 63, 64% is absolutely feasible at lower cost and at similar security, system security levels. 63% is 14, 15 percentage points higher than the Commission's impact assessment on the electricity side. We're trying to calculate what it means for the overall renewables targets, but it certainly supports a way above 30% renewables target as the most cost-effective, I'd imagine, but I need to check that. So that's a little teaser for what's coming out. I'll keep it to here so there's a bit of time for questions as well.
So thank you very much. So Tom, you've been name checked twice. So I guess you would like to answer directly those questions. The first point was by Claude. Did you go for high rests in the modeling and quit of the capacity question? And the second question is, when is the wider stakeholders meeting for the 2050 modeling?
Yes, thank you. So in our analysis, I think the short answer is that the whole discussion that grew out of Parliament's reflections on the Commission proposal were about the low technology costs, and that's what we then had the consultations with industry and with other stakeholders about, and where our consultants reviewed the literature and came up with the lower cost assessment. There wasn't such a discussion on the capacity factors, so I don't know that there's been any literature on that factor. So for this modelling exercise, as I understand it, the capacity factors were not altered. That was never raised in the early discussion, but that's something we can come back to. In terms of the other questions, I guess I'd point out that, well, yes, Dries, you do talk of the Commission's right of initiative, which we are very proud of, but we also are proudly responsive to political direction by member states. President Juncker has this as a clear theme of his whole presidency, that we respond to the wishes and directions set by member states, and that was very clear. So I think for us that feedback from member states, from stakeholders, is important in making sure that we're coming up with politically feasible as well as good ideas. On some of the other points raised, I'd mention, I guess, the question of transparency. And yes, that's not something that's at all trivial. We take it very seriously, and I do believe that in recent years we've taken major steps to make the whole process less of a black box. It's a balance, because modelling is of its nature a highly complex numerical exercise. But we've shared more, I think, than we've ever shared before, and we will carry on doing that. In terms of the progress with Potentia and the need to involve stakeholders, I think everyone agrees with you. It's true we had a meeting just with the member states last week. That was a first presentation to member states to get to inform them of first steps. But the intention of the JRC is to open up more broadly, to talk to all stakeholders. So that is definitely on their agenda. And I'm glad also, Dries, that you mentioned Artelis, because of course Artelis and the METIS model was yet another initiative of the Commission to diversify the modelling capacities in this area, and to build up the analysis and the modelling of Artelis to be able to capture European gas and electricity markets, and to look into exactly the sorts of detail that you are now looking into. It's good to hear that so far your results show 63% is feasible with current networks. That's a very interesting result, which is a result that's come out of the modelling Artelis has done on the basis of work that we've initiated, I think. So I'd make that point as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for your answer. As you have all noticed, is 1:15, which is the time that we're supposed to close the webinar. The people that answered the questions online, we haven't had the time to take all of them. We did address some of them because there were overlaps between them and between the questions raised by the other panelists. So for the ones that have not been answered, I'm going to ask the panelists to stay online a bit longer to address them. Specifically, there were questions specifically to Yamina and Andreas, so we're going to answer in written just now as we close up this webinar. I think it was a very open discussion, and I really do appreciate, Tom, your time and your insights to discussions. I think it was very helpful for everyone, and this is exactly the kind of discussion that we need to have about what kind of modeling we're looking at, because we are all very interested and we all want a good outcome in the end today. So thank you very much to both OpenExp and Agora Energiewende for organizing this webinar. It's available online, as has been said at the beginning. The slides will be available online as well. You have the address, the email addresses of both Yamina and Andreas if you want to follow up with questions specifically to them. And finally, thank you very much to the audience. I think we peaked at around 80 people online, which shows, if you think about it, it's a webinar on an impact assessment, and I think having 80 people actually interested into it is pretty amazing. So on this upbeat note, I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much for coming in. We hope it was helpful for you, and we'll be in touch very soon. Have a good day.